Good morning.
In unison, good morning.
To the jury. Sorry to keep you all waiting back there, but we just had a lot of legal issues to take up this morning, and because of that, I'm not sure, but the day may be somewhat shortened. Do you expect us to go the entire day today, or?
I would think that would be probably not the case. But you never know.
Okay, that's what I thought. You never know.
I'd hate to raise somebody's expectations and then have them looking at me at 2:15 saying, "Why are we still here?"
I understand. To the jury. Some of the witnesses that were going to testify today I put off until tomorrow, is basically what we're dealing with. And so they're calling some witnesses that were going to appear later in the day, and we're not exactly sure how much time it will take.
I will say this, Your Honor. I think we're going to have a full week, though, from here on out.
Full week?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me just. So that. Before you start, let me just give you a ruling on the motion on. I'll call it the motion regarding Roe. That motion is granted. I will admit testimony in that case. I will look for ways to restrict the length of that testimony. We'll talk about that later.
All right, that would be fine, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, you may call your next witness.
Kassim Abdool. Mr. Abdool, would you come forward, please?
When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk here and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your first and last name.
My name is Kassim Abdool. Kassim Abdool.
Thank you.
Mr. Abdool, I think you're going to have to scoot up as close as you possibly can to the microphone so everybody can hear you.
That okay?
Sounds a little better. You have a very soft voice, so try to keep it up. Thank you. Mr. Abdool, you live in Lompoc, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're employed with the school district?
Yes, sir.
And did you at one time used to work at Neverland Valley Ranch?
Yes, sir.
And from what period of time did you work at Neverland Valley Ranch?
91, 92, 93.
Do you recall when in 91 you came to work there?
No, it may be about the middle of the year. I'm just guessing.
And do you recall when in 1993 or 94 was it that you left?
It was part of 94. In the middle of 94.
When you worked at Neverland Valley Ranch, what was your position there?
When I left or when I?
No, during the time that you were employed at Neverland Valley Ranch, what was your position at the ranch? What were your job responsibilities?
To secure the ranch, to provide security for Mr. Jackson.
So you were part of his security team?
Yes, sir.
Did you have a rank at that point in time?
I started off as a basic security guard and I went up to the head of security.
What were the range of responsibilities that you had at the ranch during the time? Let's narrow it down now to 1993 and 1994, okay?
Okay.
Were you the head of security at that point in time?
Just part of 93, I think. Maybe a few months.
What were your responsibilities during 93 and 94?
To supervise, make sure the buildings are locked. Make sure whatever Mr. Jackson wants, to provide for him. Provide security for the guests. Sometimes they may need luggages to their units. We'd help with that. Make sure no intruders come on property. Those type of things.
Now, what was the time, during 93 and 94? What were the hours that you worked?
I think during most of my employment at the ranch, I worked the graveyard shift. Almost for all those years.
And, graveyard shift, means, what time do you come on and what time do you leave, generally?
Generally from about 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I work most of the time that shift.
Now, during the time that you worked at Neverland Valley Ranch, did you become acquainted with an individual by the name of Ralph Chacon?
Yes.
In what capacity? How did you get to know Mr. Chacon?
He was also a security officer at the ranch. And he worked on the shift I worked on also.
Did you know Mr. Chacon prior to the time that you came to work at Neverland Valley Ranch?
No, sir.
And since the time that you left the employment of Neverland, well, let me save that question for later, okay? Was Mr. Chacon, to your knowledge, employed at the ranch during the same period of time that you were employed there?
Yes. I think he started working at the ranch maybe a couple of months after I started in 91.
And was he working there during 93 and 94?
Yes, sir.
Part of 94?
Yes.
During the time that you were employed in security for, at Neverland Ranch, did you get to know a young child by the name of Jordan?
Yes, sir.
Did you know Jordan's last name?
Chandler.
And did you see the child Jordan Chandler on the ranch on more than one occasion?
Yes, sir.
And can you give us an idea approximately how many times you saw him on the ranch?
He was there for many times. I can't give a number of times.
During the time that the child Jordan Chandler was on the ranch, was the defendant in this case, Mr. Jackson, on the ranch?
Yes, sir.
During the times that Mr. Jackson and the child Jordan Chandler were on the ranch, were the Chandler parents present on all occasions?
No, sir.
How many occasions do you believe that Jordan Chandler, to your knowledge, was on the ranch with Mr. Jackson only?
Only?
Yeah.
Maybe a couple times, I think. 2, 3 times. I'm talking about coming on the ranch with Mr. Jackson alone.
So arriving with Mr. Jackson.
Yes.
Alone?
Yes, sir.
During the time that you were on the ranch, could you describe, well, when the child Jordan Chandler was on the ranch, did you have an opportunity to see him on a number of occasions?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe his general behavior while he was on the ranch?
I don't think he ever spoke to me. He just kept, a distance. I don't recall ever speaking to him.
Alright. Did you have an opportunity to observe how he acted on the ranch?
Well.
Objection. Vague.
Sustained.
Do you have carts on the ranch?
Golf carts?
Golf carts.
Yes, sir.
Did you have any problems with the child Chandler and the golf carts?
Yes. I remember one problem, yes.
What was that?
I think he crashed it once.
Were there any other occasions that you had problems with Mr. Chandler, the child Chandler?
Objection. Asked and answered.
No, I don't recall.
Just a moment. Overruled. You may answer. Go ahead.
What's the question, sir?
Let me rephrase it. During the time that you had an opportunity to observe the child Jordan Chandler on the ranch, how would you describe his behavior?
Kind of wild behavior. Driving wild a little bit.
Anything else?
He would keep to himself. He would not associate with the security members or talk to them.
During the time that you were employed at Neverland Ranch, did you meet a child by the name of Wade Robson?
Yes, I know him.
And during the time that you were at the ranch, did the child Wade Robson visit the ranch?
Yes, sir.
And when he did, was Mr. Jackson on the ranch?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to the child Wade Robson, would you describe his behavior?
Same type of behavior. Driving around wild, but they would not have conversation with us.
With regard to, do you know a child by the name of Brett Barnes?
Yes, sir.
Did the child Brett Barnes visit the ranch while you were there?
Yes, sir.
On more than one occasion?
Yes, sir.
And was Mr. Jackson there on those occasions?
I don't recall all the occasions, but I know that Mr. Jackson was there when Brett Barnes was there, sir.
Do you recall whether or not Brett Barnes' parents were always present when he was on the ranch with Mr. Jackson?
No, I don't recall that, sir.
With regard to your capacity as security for Mr. Jackson at the ranch, were you given instructions with regard to how you were to interact with the children who misbehaved on the ranch?
Objection. Leading.
Just a moment. Overruled. You may answer.
I don't understand your question.
Were there rules that were given to you as an employee at the ranch in terms of what you were or were not to do when children misbehaved at the ranch?
No, I don't recall rules.
Were you given any? Can you tell us whether or not you were given any instructions as to what to do when somebody did something?
Objection. Vague.
Did something wrong?
Rephrase the question.
Alright, I'll start all over again. Were there any instructions given to you during the time that you worked at the ranch as to what you were to do to try to control any children who got out of control at the ranch?
I don't recall instructions. I don't recall any instructions, sir.
During the time that you were at the ranch, do you recall an incident that involved you and Mr. Chacon with regard to some French doors being left open?
Yes, sir.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer. He did answer. Yes. Go ahead.
Now, with regard to that particular night, okay, did you see Mr. Jackson that night?
Yes, sir.
Did you work the graveyard shift that night?
Yes, sir.
Was Mr. Chacon working with you that night?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall approximately when it was you saw Mr. Jackson for the first time on that particular evening?
It would have been after 10 o'clock, 10:15 or so.
At some point that night, did you see Mr. Jackson go to the jacuzzi?
Yes, sir.
And where is the jacuzzi located?
The jacuzzi's located outside the house, in the back of the house, near the swimming pool area. There's a barbecue area, and a jacuzzi and a swimming pool area, and an arcade room on the other side.
And when you saw Mr. Jackson going to the jacuzzi area, was he alone or was he with somebody?
No, he was with the boy.
What boy?
Jordy.
And could you see how they were dressed?
Yes, sir.
How were they dressed?
They were dressed with bathing, bathing pants. But they were bare back. And they had like bathing trunks. Pants that reached just above the knee.
That went down to the knee?
Yeah, like loose-fitting pants.
Do you recall where you were at the time that you saw Mr. Jackson and the child Jordan going towards the jacuzzi?
I was.
Where were you?
I was near the office area, somewhere closer to the back of the house.
Now, at some point, let me ask you this. At the time that you saw Mr. Jackson and the child Jordan walking towards the jacuzzi, did you know where Ralph Chacon was situated or positioned?
I had an idea where he was, but he was more in the barbecue area, I think.
Was that his ordinary assignment?
Yeah, normally they would go in that back area where no one could pretty much see them.
What were the lighting conditions like at this particular point in time at night out around the swimming pool and the jacuzzi?
Like around the pool, you have these pool lights. Around the jacuzzi, you have the jacuzzi lights, and maybe some small lights in the flowers. I would say it would be like dim lighting.
Now, at some point later, did you hear Mr. Jackson say something to someone?
Yes, Mr. Jackson called me.
And did you respond to him?
Yes, sir.
As a result of what Mr. Jackson told you, did you do something?
Yes, sir.
What did you do?
I went to the chef, his name is Bucky Black. Bucky.
Okay.
I went to the chef. He was still on property that night, and I asked him to get 2 sodas for Mr. Jackson.
Alright, did you take the sodas to Mr. Jackson or?
No, I did not take them.
Now, later, when was the next time that you saw Mr. Jackson?
I saw Mr. Jackson going to the bathroom area.
What bathroom area are you talking about?
It's a bathroom, maybe that's kind of joined, joined onto the arcade room.
And when he was going to the bathroom area, was he alone or was he with someone?
I recollect he was with Jordy.
And do you recall how they were dressed?
No, I don't recall exactly how they were dressed. My best recollection, they were in bathing trunks, but to be specific, no.
And did you see them actually go into the restroom area or were they just walking towards that area?
I recall they were walking towards the restroom area.
Now, at some point in time, did you see Mr. Jackson again later that evening?
Yes, sir.
And where was he when you saw him?
He was near the back door of the main house. About maybe 5, 8 yards or so from the back door.
And was he alone or was he with somebody?
He was with Jordy.
And where was Mr. Jackson in relationship to Jordy? Where was Jordan?
He was like piggybacking. Piggyback, when you put someone on your back.
Who was on whose back?
Jordy was on Mr. Jackson's back.
Do you recall what Mr. Jackson was wearing, if anything?
He was bare back and he had a towel around his waist.
And how about the child?
The child had like a towel-like robe, like a bathrobe. It's towel material. It was thrown over him, over the child.
And where were they when you first saw them?
I'd say 5, 8 yards from the back door.
Okay, and did you see where they went?
They went into the house.
And did you see or hear anything at that point in time?
Yes, sir.
What?
I heard the two locks on the back door, the screen door and the back door lock. You know, clack, when someone close it.
Now, was that anything unusual about that?
Yes, sir.
What?
I never recall Mr. Jackson locking the house. We normally go and lock the house. We go and lock the theater, lock the game room when he goes to bed.
So that's your responsibility?
Yes.
And you're familiar with how that door locks?
Yes.
And that there's a double lock there to secure it?
It's not a double, from what I remember, it was two doors, like a screen door and a solid door. And the two doors, I heard the two doors, you know, lock.
So it's not a double lock on one door. It's two doors that have separate locks, as you recall?
I don't know it had a double lock. I can't remember, but I remember it was two doors. That's my recollection.
Alright, and each had a lock?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to know is, from the point that you saw Mr. Jackson
Yes, sir.
walking towards the bathroom area that's attached to the arcade, okay, with Jordan, to the time that you saw him later with Jordan on his back, just before he entered the door to the house, okay. How much time had elapsed, approximately?
I would say maybe half an hour or so. Half an hour. That's an average. Could be a little bit more. But I would say half an hour.
Now, after you saw Mr. Jackson and the child enter the house, and the doors were locked. Okay. Did you have an occasion where you went to the restroom area that's attached to the arcade?
Yes, sir.
And why did you go there?
I was securing the arcade room and the restroom area, locking them up.
And did you actually physically go into the restroom?
Yes, sir.
And when you went into the restroom, what did you see?
The lights were on, as far as I recollect.
Okay.
And the ground is I don't think it's like concrete. It's like cobblestone, you know, the blue cobblestone.
Okay.
That's my recollection. And the ground was wet, and there were two bathing pants on the ground close to each other.
Now, were these the same trunks that you had seen Mr. Jackson and the child Jordan Chandler wearing?
Yes. It seemed to be the same trunks.
And could you explain to the jury, where were the trunks in relationship to each other?
The trunks were maybe about this far apart.
You're indicating about
3.
a foot and a half, 3 feet?
They were this far apart. 2 feet apart. 2, 3 feet. And they were closer to the door area when you walk in.
Close to the front door, the entrance door?
Yeah, that's what I recollect, yeah.
Did you notice anything with regard to the floor?
Yeah, the floor was wet.
Now, I think in the beginning or earlier on in your testimony, you indicated that there was an incident about the French doors being unlocked. Okay. That particular evening where there was some French doors or some big doors that were unlocked.
Yeah, there were some doors unlocked in the house.
Was this, again, part of your security routine, to check
and secure, yes.
Where are these doors located in terms of, if you were to walk through these doors, what room in the house would you be in?
If you were to walk through the ones that were open?
Yes, sir.
You would come into a big living room area, and then there's a little corridor, and then Mr. Jackson's bedroom is right there.
And with regard to these particular doors, how could you describe them to the jury?
They're like tall doors. Not regular, what would I say? Rectangular doors. They were like tall doors, like 10 feet tall with an archway.
Okay.
Huge doors. And so they had bolts, big bolts. I don't recall them having locks, these doors.
Okay.
Like the other doors that I found unlocked. And so you would probably have to climb up and, bolt these heavy copper bolts into the frame, and to bolt the bottom. So each door, if you have two doors opening like that, each door would have two bolts. One on top, one below.
So you'd have to go inside the house to actually secure the house?
Yes, you have to go inside.
And then you have to walk through of the house to get out of the house?
You have to walk through the house, yes.
Was Mr. Chacon with you when you observed these two doors to be unlatched?
Yes, sir.
And did you give Mr. Chacon some instructions with regard to what you wanted him to do with these doors?
Yes, sir.
What was that?
I told him that we were going inside to secure the doors. We need to go in and lock them.
And did he do that?
No, sir.
Did you ask him on more than one occasion to do it?
I think a couple times, from what I remember, yeah.
Did he say why he wouldn't do it?
He said he's not going in the house.
Was that unusual for him to disobey an order from you?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Do you recall any other occasion where he ever did that?
No.
Now, with regard to the incident that you've just described for the ladies and gentlemen. Okay. The one with Jordan, the child Jordan Chandler, and the jacuzzi and going into the arcade restroom, okay?
Okay.
Do you have an idea of approximately when that occurred?
That would have been somewhere in the middle of 93 or so.
Was Mr. Jackson, to your knowledge, just returning from some trip?
Oh, yeah, he had returned from a trip overseas.
Do you know where?
No, he was on a tour, I guess.
Where?
He was singing overseas and he came back. He was over there for a long time.
Okay. Now, on the ranch during the time 1993, okay?
Okay.
Was there a thing called a Peter Pan display?
Yes, sir.
And where was the Peter Pan? I can't even say it. Where was the Peter Pan display located?
It was in the back of the house outside Mr. Jackson's office. He had an office in the back of the house.
Okay.
You know, how would I describe? You have the main house. You have a breezeway.
Okay.
You have Mr. Jackson's office there. And then on the other side, you have the arcade room, the swimming pool, the jacuzzi, the barbecue area. So the display, I don't recall if it was inside of the window or outside of the window, you know, but it was like on a short, when you look in the window, it was like a lighting display. But it's been so long, I can't recall if it was inside of the office or outside of the office.
Now, on an occasion while you were working at Neverland Valley Ranch, did you see an incident occur involving the defendant Michael Jackson and the child Jordan Chandler?
Yes, sir.
And was this incident before or after the incident that you've described or the occasion which you described finding the swimming trunks basically next to each other in the restroom?
I don't recall, sir. I don't recall if it was before or after.
Alright. Now, on that particular day or on that particular occasion, did you see Mr. Jackson and the child Jordan Chandler together before you saw them at the display?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't recall.
Where were?
Are you talking on this particular evening?
Yes.
I don't recall if I saw them before I saw them at that time.
Okay. And so, then, what would have been the first time you saw them?
It probably would have been when I came onto the night shift, so I would guess approximately after 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock.
Alright.
It was pretty late in the night.
And when you saw them at the Peter, did you see them at the Peter Pan display?
Yes, sir.
Now, prior to them being at the Peter Pan display, did you see where they came from?
Okay, yes.
Where did they come from?
They had come down from the hill area, probably from where the theater was, and they drove down a small hill and drove in the back of the house. The back of the security area there's a garage, and then swung around, and that's where the Peter Pan display is. So they drove in the back of the house.
You say they drove. What were they driving?
As far as I remember, it was a small golf cart.
And were they both in the same cart or in different carts?
My recollection, they were in the same cart.
Now, at the time that you saw them in front of the Peter Pan display, could you tell us what you observed? First of all, let me ask you this. Where was the child Jordan Chandler in relationship to Michael Jackson? Where were they positioned?
Jordan was standing in front of Mr. Jackson, and Mr. Jackson was standing behind him. You know, like if I'm standing here and someone is standing here, but we are both facing the same direction. They were looking at the display.
And what did you observe about Mr. Jackson's conduct in relationship to the child at that time?
When I turned, I turned to walk away. I went to ask him a question. When I turned to walk away, and on the side, I saw Mr. Jackson giving him a little kiss on the side here, and he was kind of like hugging him. I just saw that maybe a couple seconds.
And then you kept going?
Yeah, I kept going.
You didn't watch what happened after that?
No.
Now, was Mr. Chacon working that night?
Yes, sir.
Now, in May of 1994, You were subpoenaed to appear before the Los Angeles grand jury?
Yeah, okay, I think that's the time.
You recall going down to Los Angeles?
Yes, sir.
And you recall testifying in front of the grand jury?
Yes, sir.
You recall receiving a subpoena before you were to go down there?
Yes, sir.
And what was your attitude towards receiving the subpoena to go to the grand jury?
Objection. Vague. Relevance.
Goes to his bias, Your Honor, his motive for testifying.
Overruled. You may answer.
Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
I didn't want to go.
Now, prior to going down to Los Angeles to testify, did you have a meeting with attorneys who represented Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
And who were those attorneys?
It was Mr. Steve Cochran, Mr. Jackson's attorney. It was also a private investigator.
And do you recall where that meeting occurred?
Yes, sir.
Where was that?
Mr. Bob Sanger's office in Santa Barbara.
And at the time that you were at that meeting, did the attorneys for Mr. Jackson offer you certain services?
Objection. Misstates the evidence. One attorney was mentioned.
Okay, I'll rephrase it if that's the problem. At the time that you met at Mr. Sanger's office with the private investigator and Mr. Steve Cochran, did he offer you services?
I don't recall, but he gave me some advice.
Well, did you have a lawyer representing you at that time?
No, sir.
Did they offer to represent you?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
He offered to be down with the grand jury if we needed advice, attorney.
Can you tell us?
I think. I vaguely remember now that. I think he remembered, he offered, to represent us, represent me.
Do you recall whether or not you were ever offered any transportation down there?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes, sir.
Were you?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever use Mr. Steve Cochran's services?
No, sir.
Were you asked what you were going to say in front of the grand jury by Mr. Cochran?
Yes, sir.
Did you tell them?
I don't recall telling him, sir.
Did you tell them what you were going to do?
I told him I was going to say what I know. I speak the truth.
Now, between the time that you received the subpoena to appear before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury and the time that you actually testified at the before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury, did you receive a raise?
Yes, sir.
And how much of a raise did you receive?
About $1,000 a month more. Or maybe a little bit more than that.
Was this a proposal that you had made to them? Had you requested the raise?
Yes, sir.
And how long prior to the time that you went down to Los Angeles to testify had you requested that raise?
A few months. Couple months, maybe. I'm guessing. It was before.
Now, after you testified in front of the Los Angeles County Grand Jury, did you receive any threats?
Objection. Leading. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, sir.
In what fashion? In what form did you receive threats? Mr. Abdool, there's some water up there if you'd like some water. Take your time.
Yes, sir.
What were the nature? Describe what threats you received.
People would call at home and threaten to kill me and my family. A lot of phone calls coming to the house.
Was there always somebody on the other end of the line when you picked the phone up?
Objection. Leading.
They would stay on the line sometimes.
Overruled. You may answer.
They would stay on the line sometimes, yes. Just stay on the line.
Did you report these threats to law enforcement at the time that they occurred?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Abdool, do you know what the Witness Protection Program is?
I know. I heard about it. I don't know exactly what it entails.
Did you ever request for you and your family to be put in the Witness Protection Program?
Objection. Leading. Move to strike.
Stricken. It's leading.
At any time did you ever request of law enforcement protection?
Same objection.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, sir.
And what did you request?
I requested to be put in that program, the Witness Protection Program.
Now, with regard to the Neverland Valley Ranch, was there a change in terms of additional security people who were brought onto the ranch during the time that Mr. Jackson was under investigation back in 1993?
There was not a change. There was addition, some more people came on.
And did you folks on the ranch have a name for those people, or was there a name that was associated with them?
Yes, sir.
What was that?
The Office of Special Services.
Were they armed?
Yes, sir.
Were you armed?
No, sir.
The regular security staff was not?
No, sir.
How would you describe the atmosphere at the ranch with these people who are armed on the ranch?
It was very tense. I would say in the beginning, they were big people, and they were armed. And I've seen them drink on property, so you'd be concerned about your security on the ranch. I also heard them make threats to people on the ranch.
Objection.
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Move to strike.
Stricken. Next question.
Did you at any time ever hear them make threats to people on the ranch?
Objection. Hearsay. Move to strike.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, sir.
And did they do that to you also?
Not directly, no.
Okay. Did they do it indirectly or what you thought was indirectly?
Yes, sir.
In what fashion?
Objection.
Oops. Sorry. I'll wait.
You said, objection. I didn't hear your.
Leading and calls for speculation.
Sustained.
In what fashion?
Same objection.
That was your last question.
That.
Really, you have to take the last two questions to understand my ruling that you were leading.
I thought the first one was, but I didn't think the second would be, in what fashion? But I'll start over, Judge. That's no problem. You indicated that you thought that you had been intimidated indirectly. Could you describe for the jury in what fashion that occurred?
Objection. Misstates the evidence, leading, and foundation, and calls for speculation.
I think what I'm asking you to do is to go back and form a foundation for the question you're asking before you ask in what fashion.
Okay. Were you ever indirectly intimidated on the ranch?
Objection. Leading. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
You may answer. Were you ever indirectly intimidated on the ranch?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember who the person or persons were that were involved?
Yes, sir.
Who were they?
On couple occasions it was one person, and at other times it would be 2, 3 of them, of the OS officers.
Could you describe in what manner you were indirectly intimidated by these people?
Are you saying things that they would say?
You tell us. What was the nature of it?
Objection. Foundation and hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
I remember one of them, his name was Van Norman. He would say how they would beat people when they were overseas. When they were on tour with Mr. Jackson, how they would beat people, and he knew a hit man in Europe. And I remember once there was a fan at the front gate and he came down and put his gun and pointed it at her head. She was outside the gate. And also.
Objection. Narrative.
Sustained.
Was there any other indirect incidents directed directly at you?
Yes, sir.
All right. What was that?
After I testified at the grand jury, when I'm sitting in my office, they would just pass outside my office and just stare at me. They would not come in and talk to me. They would just walk past outside the door.
Are there occasions they displayed their firearms to you?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Let's move on to another subject, if we can. Were you involved in a civil lawsuit against Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall approximately when that lawsuit was filed?
95, 96. Something around there.
So this was at least a couple of years after your testimony, or at least 1 year after your testimony before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury.
Yes.
During the course of the time that you were involved in that lawsuit, did you give a statement to the media?
Yes, sir.
And describe how that came about.
I think it was in the attorney's office.
The attorney?
Our attorney's office, yes.
Who's that?
Mr. Ring.
Okay. And that's where the interview occurred?
Yes, sir.
And was it your idea to have the interview?
No, I don't think so. I don't recall that.
Did you understand that as a result of the interview, that someone was going to pay someone some money?
Yes, sir.
Did you receive any of the money?
No, sir.
Did you understand how that money was going to be used?
Yes, sir.
For what purpose?
To carry on the civil case.
Against Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And do you know who it was that set up that interview?
No, I don't recall.
Now, one last question. Between the time that you received your subpoena to appear before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury, okay?
Okay.
And, let me go back and start over again, okay? You received a subpoena to appear before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, between the time that you received that subpoena and the time that you actually appeared before the grand jury to testify, okay?
Okay.
We're talking about that time frame.
Yes.
Did you have a conversation with Mr. Chacon, Ralph Chacon, about what he saw the night that you found the swimming trunks side by side in the restroom?
Yes, sir.
And did he tell you what he saw?
Yes, sir.
Objection. Hearsay.
I haven't asked that yet. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Okay, no further questions.
Cross-examine?
Yes, please, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Abdool.
Good morning, sir.
My name is Thomas Mesereau. I speak for Mr. Jackson.
Okay.
If anything I ask you is unclear, if you don't understand it, please don't answer and just ask me, and I'll try and rephrase it, okay?
Okay.
Now, you told the prosecutor that on one occasion you met at Mr. Sanger's office in Santa Barbara, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you told the prosecutor that present were attorney Steve Cochran, correct?
Yes, sir.
And an investigator, right?
Yes, sir.
And you told the prosecutor that in response to questions asked of you by Mr. Cochran and the investigator, you said you would tell the truth, correct?
Yes, sir.
In your discussions with them, you told the truth, correct?
I don't recall having discussions with them.
Well, you met at the office, true?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how long was the meeting?
There were 2 meetings that day.
Do you know when these meetings took place?
The date are you talking about? I don't recall the date.
Okay. Do you recall approximately when those meetings took place?
It was just within a week before going to the grand jury.
And do you know approximately when you went to the grand jury?
It was a Monday.
Was it in 1993, do you think?
Early, 94 maybe.
Would it be approximately May of 1994, do you think?
Okay.
And you met with Mr. Cochran and the investigator at some point before you testified before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury in May of 1994, right?
Yes, sir.
How many meetings did you have with any representatives of Mr. Jackson before you testified before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury in May of 1994?
2 meetings.
Okay.
3 meetings.
And you told the truth.
Yes.
In all of your discussions at those meetings, correct?
Yes, sir.
You told the truth about what you had observed at Neverland, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Assumes facts not in evidence that he said anything to them.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken.
In any of those 3 meetings, did you utter a word?
That's vague.
Sustained.
Object.
In any of those 3 meetings, did you speak?
Yes, sir.
Did you speak about what you had observed at Neverland?
I don't recall speaking about what I observed.
Do you recall speaking about Mr. Jackson in those meetings?
No.
Do you recall speaking about your employment at Neverland?
I don't recall, sir.
Do you recall speaking about your background before you ever worked at Neverland?
I don't recall. I may have. I don't recall.
Do you remember signing a statement, Mr. Abdool, in one of those meetings?
No, I don't recall that.
Do you recall signing a statement on January 13, 1994?
No, sir.
Would it refresh your recollection if I show you?
Sure.
A statement? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can I see it first, counsel? Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, it's a 2-page statement. Could I request that the witness just read it to himself?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There's another page, too.
Yes.
Mr. Abdool, have you had a chance to look at and read that statement?
Yes, sir.
Does it refresh your recollection about what you signed?
Yes, sir.
And that is your signature on this statement, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In fact, in the beginning of the statement, you corrected the spelling of your last name in your own handwriting, correct?
Yes.
You said you'd worked at Neverland Ranch since June of 1991, correct?
Okay.
Is that approximately when you started work?
Yes, sir.
You said during your employment at the ranch, you worked in the security department and that you were currently working as a shift supervisor, right?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the use of the reading of the statement into the record. It's hearsay and it's not used to refresh his recollection.
Sustained.
Do you remember signing a statement?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember what you said in the statement?
Well, vague as to. He stated it's 2 pages long, so it's.
Do you mean outside of his having just read it now, or what?
Yes. Well.
You gave it to him to refresh his memory.
Yes, I did. Does the statement you read refresh your recollection about the statement you signed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that is your signature on the statement, correct?
Yes, sir.
You told representatives of Mr. Jackson that you'd never seen Mr. Jackson touch any child in a sexual manner or in any way that could be construed as sexual, correct?
That's what I wrote. Yeah. I signed to that, yes.
You said you'd never seen Mr. Jackson unclothed or in the company of unclothed children, correct?
Yes. I mean, when I say, unclothed, naked. If you have on pants, that's not unclothed.
But you said you'd never seen Mr. Jackson unclothed or in the company of an unclothed child, correct?
Yes.
You said you'd seen Mr. Jackson play with children, right?
Yes, sir.
You said he plays as if he's a child himself, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to object to reading the document into. It's hearsay.
Sustained.
Cross-examination. Impeachment, Your Honor.
Well,
I believe on cross-examination.
some is and some isn't. You're reading the whole thing, so you're not being very discerning in your impeachment.
Well, I'm not going to read the whole thing.
There was certain questions that he was asked that you can do that with. You're reading a lot more into it. You'd have to lay the foundation for each remark.
Okay, do you remember signing a statement that discussed what you'd seen of Jordan Chandler at Neverland?
I remember signing a statement. I believe that statement that I signed was not at Mr. when I met with the attorneys. That was a statement that was prepared by the investigator in his handwriting. Yes, I did sign it.
And you also corrected the statement before you signed it, true?
My name, I corrected it, yes.
You said you'd never seen Mr. Jackson engage in anything sexual with Jordan Chandler, correct?
Yes.
And you said that no one working at the ranch had ever complained about Mr. Jackson doing anything sexual with children, correct?
Right. No, that was before I went to the grand jury, before I met with in Mr. Sanger's office.
The date was January 13, 1994, right?
Right.
Okay.
So that was about months before I went to the grand jury.
You said you were the father of 2 children.
Yes, sir.
That you had no problem leaving them alone with Mr. Jackson, correct?
I'm going to object to the question. It's hearsay. It's an improper use of the document.
Sustained.
At any time did you ever tell any representative of Mr. Jackson that you are the father of 2 children, ages 9 and 13, and you would have no problem leaving them alone with Mr. Jackson?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I probably did. I have no reason to say no.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you that portion of it?
If it's there, yeah.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I signed to that.
You've had a chance to look at that document?
Yeah. I've looked at it, sir.
And you did make that statement, that you were the father of 2 children, 9 and 13, and they had both visited the ranch, right?
I signed it, the statement. It's not my writing. I didn't write that statement.
But you signed it?
Yes.
After correcting it, correct?
I corrected my spelling of my name. I didn't write that statement, sir. That's not my writing.
Does your signature appear on both pages of that statement?
Yes, that's my signature. I signed that document.
Okay, now, The prosecutor alluded to a lawsuit that you and Ralph Chacon and Adrian McManus and others filed against Michael Jackson, correct?
Yes, sir.
In that lawsuit, you also sued the security guards that you called the OSS, right?
Yes, sir.
And one of the security guards you sued was James Van Norman, right?
Yes, sir.
He's the fella you just testified to threatening you, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that was the longest civil trial in the history of this courthouse in Santa Maria, California, right?
I don't know.
It was a 6-month trial, approximately, was it not?
Yes, sir.
And at the conclusion of that trial, Mr. Jackson prevailed, right?
Yes, sir.
And you ended up with a judgment against you for $1,473,117.61, correct?
I don't know the figure, but that sounds correct.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you the judgment?
It's fine. I accept it.
Alright, and the security guards that you sued also prevailed.
Yes.
In that lawsuit, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's your understanding that Mr. Jackson won the case, was awarded costs, and was awarded all of his attorney's fees against you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Alright, did you ever pay him any of that money?
No, sir.
Do you know approximately when you filed that case?
I think maybe 1995. I'm not sure.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you the complaint? It has a date of December 2nd, 1994. Does that sound correct?
Okay.
You sued Mr. Jackson for many different claims, correct?
Yes, sir.
You sued him for emotional distress, correct? Right?
If it says that, I don't recall all the complaints.
Well, you said you'd been intimidated during your employment, right?
Yes, sir.
And you testified in the case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you testified that you had suffered emotional distress and various medical problems because of the way you were treated at Neverland, true?
Yes, sir.
And your attorney was a gentleman named Mr. Ring, correct?
That's correct.
When did you first go to Mr. Ring to talk about suing Mr. Jackson and the security people of the ranch?
It would be after we stopped work at the ranch. That's my recollection.
And approximately when was that?
I don't recall, sir.
Do you know the year you left your employment?
94.
Okay. Do you remember being disciplined while you were working at Neverland for stealing Mr. Jackson's gasoline?
For stealing Mr. Jackson's gasoline?
Yes.
No. First time no.
You were counseled by a security chief named Mr. Wegner, spelled Wegner, correct?
That's that's the correct spelling.
Do you remember being disciplined because you had filled your car up with Mr. Jackson's gasoline?
Mr. Jack, where would I get his gasoline from to fill my car up? No.
Would it refresh your recollection to show you that disciplinary report?
Sure, yeah.
May I approach?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Have you had a chance to look at that disciplinary report?
Yes.
Does it refresh your recollection about that issue?
Right. I remember that, yeah.
Okay. A report was filed to that effect, correct?
Right.
That you had improperly filled your own vehicle with Mr. Jackson's gasoline.
No, not improperly fill my vehicle. I used my vehicle to go to Solvang to run an errand, and it was replaced for me, the 3 gallons of gasoline.
Okay.
I remember that, yeah. I did not steal the man's gasoline. And that's why I refused to sign it, because I was having problem with the chief at that time.
You were counseled on the violation, true?
Yes. I told you I used my vehicle and
You were told a violation would be part of your permanent record of employment at Neverland, true?
I don't recall, probably.
Okay. There are gasoline pumps on the ranch, true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Staff, particularly security staff, are not supposed to be filling their own vehicles with Mr. Jackson's gasoline, correct?
I'm going to object as argumentative.
Sustained. It's a foundational sustaining.
Did you know the policy on whether or not security staff are supposed to use Mr. Jackson's gasoline for their own personal use?
I don't know if there's a policy, but of course you can't use his gasoline for your personal use. And as I said, sir, I did not use it for my personal use.
You're not supposed to fill your tank with it, correct?
I didn't fill my tank. I put, 3 gallons of gasoline. I vaguely remember that. Yes, that happened.
All right.
I'm not denying it.
Were you ever disciplined on any other occasion that you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you know one way or another whether you were disciplined on any other occasion?
I don't recall. That one he told me, it even surprised me. I had forgotten about it. It was a non-issue as far as I was concerned.
Now, you claimed in your lawsuit that you had been disabled because of what happened to you at Neverland, true?
Disabled, emotionally disabled, yes.
Yes. And you obtained a number of what are called disability certificates from a physician because of your disability, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you apply for state disability? Do you know?
What is state disability?
Well, there are various ways to file for disability, correct?
Well, like unemployment?
Or disability. You claimed that you could not work because of all the emotional problems you had resulting from your work at Neverland, correct?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, excuse me, I'm going to object that the question is vague as to whether he's talking about. I don't want to go any further, but it's vague as to what point in time or what document he's referring to.
I'm not referring to a document, Your Honor.
Well, then it's vague.
I'll rephrase. It was your position when you filed the lawsuit against Mr. Jackson and the security guards that you should get millions of dollars because you had been emotionally disabled, correct?
Yes, sir.
You claimed you were so distraught and depressed that you couldn't work, true?
Yes, sir.
And you were actually examined by physicians in that regard, true?
Yes, sir.
And at one point an insurance company refused to pay you any benefits because they said you weren't disabled, right?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It's hearsay.
Sustained.
Do you remember TIG Insurance concluding that you, Mr. Abdool, are not medically disabled?
Your Honor, I'm going to object and I'm going to ask the court to admonish counsel. That's the same question, and he just asked it with a new start to it.
The objection is sustained.
Okay. The jury in your civil suit completely rejected your claims that you were emotionally or medically damaged by anything at Neverland, true?
Yes, that's correct.
And you never got the millions you were seeking, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Do you know approximately when that suit ended?
I know it was 6 months. I don't have the date, no.
Now, as head of security at Neverland, you were concerned about media people coming on the property, true?
Yes, sir.
And one of your jobs was to try and keep media people away from Mr. Jackson, right?
Keep anybody away from the property, any intruders.
But you were particularly concerned about tabloid-type people, correct?
I would say generally anyone, any type of intruder.
But weren't you particularly concerned about media attempts to get to Mr. Jackson?
Object. Asked and answered.
Overruled. You may answer.
We were concerned. I was concerned with any intruder on the property.
Okay, and would that include the media?
Yes, sir.
Would that include people who write for tabloids?
Yes, sir.
And was it your understanding that Mr. Jackson was very concerned about his privacy when it came to the media?
Lack of foundation. Object.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, sir.
Were you still employed at Neverland when you first spoke to representatives of the media about Mr. Jackson?
No, sir.
How long after you left your employment did you talk to representatives of the media about Mr. Jackson?
I don't recall, sir.
You talked to somebody named Gary from an organization called Splash, correct?
Right.
And it was your understanding that you would be quoted in a tabloid called The Star, right?
It wasn't me, it was the attorney's office.
But your understanding was that you were going to be quoted in an article in a tabloid called The Star, right?
Okay, yes.
And you were interviewed along with Ralph Chacon, correct?
Yes.
You were interviewed with Adrian McManus, correct?
Yes, sir.
How many meetings did you have with that tabloid?
I think it was just one meeting.
Okay. Do you know what they paid for the interview?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear they paid $15,000 for that interview?
I probably did. I don't recall that exactly.
And what you chose to do was rather than not put the money in your pocket, You chose to use it to fund your lawsuit against Mr. Jackson where you wanted to get millions, right?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, it turned out to be a poor investment, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Does July 31st, 1994, sound like the approximate time you stopped working at Neverland?
Yes.
Okay. How long after you stopped working do you think you and Chacon and McManus got together and met with the attorney about filing a lawsuit?
Object. Assumes facts not in evidence.
I'll rephrase it. Did you and Ralph Chacon and Adrian McManus at some point get together and decide to jointly file a lawsuit against Mr. Jackson?
I don't recall Adrian McManus. I recall Melanie Bagnall.
Do you know who Adrian McManus is?
Yeah, she probably came on at some time after we spoke. That's my recollection.
And all of you sued the private security people that you called the OS, right?
Yes, sir.
And you all claim that these people had terrorized you and caused damages to you, right?
Yes, sir.
And that claim, again, was rejected completely by the jury, right?
Yes, sir.
Who were the other people that you claim were causing severe distress to you and Ralph Chacon and the others who joined in your lawsuit?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the question as compound with regard to other people.
I'm not sure what you meant, counsel.
I'll rephrase. You testified earlier that one of the things you were concerned about was private security guards of Mr. Jackson consuming alcohol, correct?
One of them I saw drinking alcohol.
One individual?
Yes.
Okay, and who was that?
Van Norman.
Okay, and you also complained about someone carrying a firearm, correct?
I don't recall specifically. I probably did.
Well, you testified that you saw somebody point a firearm at a fan, correct?
Yes.
And who was that?
Van Norman. That's my recollection.
Now, you never complained to Mr. Jackson about Mr. Van Norman carrying a firearm, true?
No, never.
And you never complained to Mr. Jackson about Mr. Van Norman drinking alcohol, correct?
Never, no.
And you never complained to Mr. Jackson about any of these private security guards threatening anyone, right?
That's correct.
And, in fact, you never complained to Mr. Jackson about any of them doing anything wrong at any time, true?
True.
Did you, if you remember, sign a confidentiality agreement when you went to work at Neverland?
Yes, I think I recall. I think I did one, yeah.
And was it your belief that as a condition of your working at Neverland, that you were not supposed to take information about Mr. Jackson's life and exploit it in the media?
That's correct, sir.
Yet, when you left your employment, that's exactly what you did, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you and Ralph Chacon discuss what tabloid you were going to sell a story to?
I don't recall, no.
Did you ever get together with Adrian McManus and discuss what information you and she were going to sell to a tabloid about Mr. Jackson?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we just gave an interview and she spoke and I think I probably spoke, too.
Did you learn that any of the information you sold had actually been printed about Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And how did you learn that?
I recall, I think I saw the tabloid. I think I saw it, yeah.
Now, you actually hired a guy named Gary to be an agent to get more tabloid opportunities, correct?
Yes, we used him as a broker or something like that.
Yeah, he was a broker to go to various tabloids around the world to see if he could sell stories, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, to your knowledge, did Gary get a commission from whatever he brought in? Do you know?
No.
But you did this with the approval of your attorney, right?
I wouldn't use approval. But he explained to us that we needed the money. So if you say approval, yes.
And part of the reason for doing all this was to put pressure on Mr. Jackson to settle that case and give you people money, right?
No, I don't think so, no. We needed the money. We had no money to go ahead with the case.
The plan was to do what you could to make Mr. Jackson want to get rid of this case, right?
Object as asked and answered, Your Honor.
Sustained.
And you actually had your photograph taken by Gary, true?
I don't recall, but probably, yeah.
And the purpose of the photograph was to have that photograph appear in tabloids, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Did you and the other plaintiffs in that civil case have a nickname that you used for yourselves?
No, I don't think so. I don't recall that.
Well, did you ever call yourselves the Neverland Five or something like that?
No.
Did you ever see an article with a name like that?
I've heard that, yeah.
But that's not a nickname you people were using yourselves, correct?
No, I didn't give myself that name.
Okay. You also gave interviews about Mr. Jackson in front of this courthouse, true?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as vague as to when in time.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor. Around the time you were pursuing your civil lawsuit against Mr. Jackson, you had to come to this courthouse from time to time, right?
Yes, sir.
And you did give some interviews to reporters at this courthouse, right?
I vaguely remember I think I spoke to reporters outside, yes.
Okay, and do you remember meeting with your broker in a lawyer's conference room in this courthouse?
No, I don't recall that.
Do you remember meeting with Gary in a lawyer's conference room here when your photograph was taken?
No, I would think that the photograph was taken in our attorney's office in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
It may have. I don't recall, but I would think it was Santa Barbara.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you
No, it's fine.
a page of your deposition?
It's fine. If I said it, yeah.
You remember your deposition being taken in that case, true?
Yes.
In fact, there are volumes of that deposition, right?
What I'm saying is, if it's there, then that's correct, but I couldn't recall.
Now, the plan initially when you hired the broker named Gary was to put together a fund of money to pay costs in the litigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, that's what your lawyer spent that money on, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember what you were interviewed about by the tabloids?
No, it's been a long time. I don't recall.
Do you remember being interviewed about Mr. Jackson's relationship with Lisa Marie Presley?
Specifically me, I don't recall that, no.
Do you recall being there when Chacon and McManus were talking about that?
I don't.
Object as immaterial, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't specifically recall exactly what questions and answers were given, no. It's been over 13 years. I don't recall. But, yeah, there was an interview.
Was Gary at the interview?
Yes.
Okay. Who else was there, if you remember?
I think Melanie Bagnall, Ralph Chacon, myself, Adrian McManus. I'm not sure about Sandy Doms. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't recall anymore.
And do you remember you were quoted in an article entitled, Kinky Sex Secrets of Michael and Lisa Marie's Bedroom?
I don't recall being quoted in that article. But if it's there, the article, it may not be me saying it, but if it's there, if it's quoted there, it's quoted there.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you the title?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It's immaterial. He stated he didn't have anything to do with it. Lack of foundation. It's hearsay.
Well, I will let him refresh his recollection with it. But we'll take a break first.
Alright,